So I'm going to explain a little bit about my background as we go through, but here's my plan for this time that we have together. So I'm going to use first my academic background to talk about ways that kind of researchers and academics talk about how personal growth can occur in later life. We hear a lot about declines as we get older, right? And maybe, as we move through this period of life, maybe we're aware of that, of the things that we can't do that we used to be able to do. But there are important ways that we see increased well-being and growth, and that's supported by research. So I'll talk about that. And then I'll tell you a little bit about my mindfulness background and meditation background, and offer some definitions of what that is. And then talk about how my experience and background in mindfulness really seems to fit in, actually, with what psychologists are saying about what's possible in later life. And we'll do some meditation together. I know there are some very experienced meditators here, and it might be new to some of you, but I thought that it would be important for us to have that experience. So that's what I've got planned for us. So the academic perspective to start. Here, this is a visual of my academic life path, if you will. So when I was an undergraduate college student, like the ones I'm going to be meeting in a few weeks at Ithaca College, I went to the University of Rochester, and it's a little hard to see, but I studied math and music. And I've had a lot of time to think about why. It's because I like puzzles and understanding how things fit together, and math and music were part of that. After college, I thought I was going to be a professional musician, and then I think very wisely decided that I'd rather be a really good amateur musician than a kind of a mediocre professional musician. So I did what a lot of people in their 20s do. I had various jobs and really knew at one point that I needed to, do work that I cared about. So I went to study human development. I think it's a case of, you're always interested in solving your own problems. So I was like, I don't, know where I'm going. So maybe if I study that, it'll help me. So I came to Cornell to get a PhD in human development. And during that time, my advisor, who of course was also aging along with every human being on the planet, got interested in studying aging. And so I got involved in these studies, the Cornell Retirement and Wellbeing Study, a study called the Pathway Study, which, perhaps some of you still have old Pathways mugs. Those were very common in Tompkins County back during the study, but it started off actually with a study of Kendall. So Kendall was opening in 1998, and we thought, as a social scientist, you can't randomly assign people, say, to move to Longview or not. Let's see how much better the Longview people assigned to Longview do. Well, we can't do that, but we can at least, in this case with Kendall, we could say, okay, we can talk to people before they move to Kendall and after and see what happens. And that expanded to different places in Tompkins County. And just as a side note, ironically, now my mom lives at Kendall. So I feel like there's some kind of big circle there. So after my PhD, I came to Ithaca College in 2000. So I've been teaching 24 years, and I teach classes, as I was saying earlier, from general classes to more specialized classes. But I've had a lot of time thinking about, not just about later life in general, but how we talk about later life. Because mostly I'm talking about aging to 19-year-olds, which is an interesting phenomenon, right? I just want to say that I would say 98% of my students have an older adult that they really care about and that they think is amazing. And they also think that older people in general are kind of scary. you know? So I'm like, but every older person is somebody's grandma or grandpa. Anyway, so that's what I'm working with. So I'm always trying to present a nuanced story about aging. Yes, there are declines. You know, our processing speed isn't as fast as it used to be. But there are opportunities. There are ways in which, well, I'll show you later, but that we're happier than those 19-year-olds. I'm happier than I was when I was 19, and I'm guessing that many of you would share that. So let's talk about some of those famous psychologists and what they said. So Erik Erikson, no relation that I know of, was one of those students of Freud. You know, Freud really focused on what happened to small children. Like by adolescence, he thought you were kind of done with development, even though he himself, of course, lived to a very rich older age. But some of his students gave more attention to what happened after adolescence. So Erik Erikson, yes, he thought that early life was very important and that all of these stages of life happened by the time you got to the age of my college students. That you learned that your caregiver was somebody that you could trust, that you could do things on your own, take initiative, create an identity and be in an intimate relationship. His difference with Freud was that he thought that there was really important work to do as an adult. And I think that these, for me, are really important concepts to think about. Now, I would think of these in general just as tasks that we revisit again and again as adults. So this first one, called generativity, is generativity in terms of like, what am I going to generate in the outside world that's meaningful? Am I going to mentor other people? Am I going to make the world a better place in some way? And so you can think about it as, you know, if you're imagining yourself at 19, or my students who I'm going to meet soon, you know, they're just at that stage where they've done some figuring out of who they are, and now what, right? What are they going to be in the world? And so that's one thing that we do as adults. And of course, this task can be different at different times in our lives. So I'm 61, and my kids are in their 20s. So for a while, my sort of generativity was building a career and, you know, taking my kids to music lessons and doing all that stuff to help them create their identity and be ready to go out in the world. Now I'm renegotiating my generativity, right? At this stage where, you know, I have a finite number of years left teaching and my kids don't need me as much anymore. What does it mean? What kind of impact am I going to have on the world? Also, as adults, we work to kind of make us a meaningful story about our lives. So often this is phrased as ego integrity. And so it's involved with this process of life review, looking back. What did I do that was helpful? What kind of mistakes did I make? How did that change things? And so it's not about, you know, just creating a, like, everything was great story, but it's about telling your story so that it has some meaning. And, you know, there's a stereotype about older people that all they like to do is, you know, like, well, when I was a kid, you know, this happened. Or, you know, you hear this same story about, you know, my parent or my sibling or my work again and again, but there's a purpose to that. Part of that purpose of the storytelling is working on incorporating all the experiences of your life into a meaningful whole. And I see this with my mom. She comes to my classes on a very regular basis, so I've probably heard her talk to classes at least 15 times, maybe 20 times, I don't know. And I hear how she brings up different things each time that she's kind of working on, like her relationship with her parents was kind of fraught. So I hear her working to find meaning in that difficult part of her past. So these are available to us, kind of regardless of what our physical capabilities are. We can still think about ways that we can impact the world positively and find meaning. This I really like. So Gene Cohen was a gerontologist who was really interested in the positive aspects of aging. And he created this idea about developmental intelligence. He has a great book called The Mature Mind. I have a slide at the end that has some recommended reading if you want that. But this idea of developmental intelligence is that we all within us have a sense of where we need to go to grow. Some people might be lower in that or afraid to move in that direction, but we all have a sense of, have you ever done that thing where you're like, I don't know how this is going to turn out, it's kind of scary, but I'm going to do it anyway? I think that's what he's talking about with developmental intelligence. We have a sense of, I'm ready to push myself in this direction. And again, I think that this is available to us, if you're Simone Biles, right, if anybody's watching the Olympics as much as I am, right, she has ways that she's growing, she's going to do an extra flip or go even higher. But we can be pushing ourselves in other ways, learning things, creating relationships, right, that are also aspects of growth. So I think that that's something also to keep in mind as we think about our own opportunities for growth as we age. Okay, so Gene Cohen, same person as last slide, he posited these stages of later life. So I see all of these existing as, like you can try them on for size. Do you like that generativity and integrity, or do you like this? So here's what Cohen's stages of later life are. He did think that in midlife, and what is midlife? I don't know, whenever you feel like it's midlife. But there is often kind of a period of reevaluation. Not a midlife crisis, like not everybody goes and divorces their wife and gets a red sports car, right? That's the stereotype we have about what happens in midlife. But if you're at that stage like I am, right? Okay, you got, I got to full professor. My kids are, reasonable human beings. Like, now what? Because that was my work for a long time. And now what? So many people go through this reevaluation phase. And then many people go on to what he called a liberation phase. And I see this in my friends. A phase where you realize, I should speak my mind, because what are people going to do to me anyway? I have a friend who works at Cornell, and she did not get a promotion that she applied for, and she is not afraid to tell her new boss if things aren't going well. And I see that as part of this liberation phase. She's like, well, what are they going to do to me? And this actually is where I think a lot of our freedom and happiness can come from compared to my 19-year-olds. I don't know if you spend much time around young adults, but they feel very hemmed in, right? What am I going to do? What are people going to think of me? Am I going to succeed? There's a lot of pressure on them. And so to think that, in later years, we can experience some release from that kind of self-consciousness is a positive. So similar to the finding meaning stage that Erickson had, Cohen says there's a summing up stage. Like, how do I put this all together? And then he says, well, encore is really just you keep doing this. It's not like you achieve liberation and you're done. That you, as life continues and things happen, you revisit these these ideas and these concepts. Okay, so this is data. If you wanted like results and not just this person thought that and this person thought the other thing, this is and if you Google U-curve of happiness images, you'll see this same shape over and over in different data. We might normally think that children are the happiest, right? They're free and they don't have any responsibilities. And actually, I mean, they didn't survey children in this version, but look, people in this 80-ish age group were actually the happiest. Now the differences, if you note the scale, are not huge, but in terms of social science data, this is an incredible result, and it's been duplicated again and again. That we see happiness decline to about the 50s usually, and then we see this uptick. And I think that this is really worth thinking about. Again, as in opposition to a lot of the stereotypes about aging that we hear in the media, right? It's all downhill from here. Well, it's not actually. Look, it's uphill. It's improvement. And so people have...
Why
Yeah.
did it dip? What
Yeah, what do you...
thinking, why would happiness go down at that point?
Anybody have ideas? I mean, I have some things that I've read and things I've experienced, but what do you think?
Well, the stress of working life makes
So-
everybody crazy.
Yeah, so you're still working at that point.
I think crazy, but menopause, your body changes completely.
There are a lot of changes, including menopause, happening at that age. I think it does have a lot to do with work and family life. If you think about, in this first half of adulthood, you're, like I described for me, like you're working to establish a career, you've got kids in the household, and we love our kids, but also they can make you unhappy, right? They're a lot of work. There's this freedom that often comes in these later years, I think, just in terms of time and energy. So we have more opportunity I was just talking with a friend yesterday about actually, can I admit this? Like how much we hated like playing with dolls with our kids. Like I'm always up for a board game or, a walk in the woods, but I really didn't like that pretend play. Well, I don't have to do that anymore because I don't have a young kid in the household. So I can now better organize my life to do things that I want to do. And I think that that's a lot of it. It's also, by the way, one of the reasons why older people vote more than younger people, right? We have time and energy and the ability to track things like when elections are. So this opportunity to choose and organize our lives better has a fancy academic name, socio-emotional selectivity, but it's a pretty understandable concept. As we age, we turn away from activities and social connections that bring negativity. Now, we don't always have the opportunity to do this, but what we see in research is that we do more and more of this as we get older. We're ready to say, that organization, I'm always drawing on my own experience, that organization I've been associated with, I'm not getting anything out of that anymore. Or those, I don't really agree with the people, I think I'm gonna leave, right? Liberation phase. What are they gonna do to me now? I'm gonna quit that, or, I'm gonna choose not to reach out to that family member who just wants to regale me with their opposing political views, whatever your example is. And this sort of organizing your social ties is really important because our social ties are often what brings us the most happiness and also the most conflict, potentially, right? When we did that study of people moving to Kendall and we asked them, what's the best thing you love about having moved to a community? Oh, the people. And then we asked them, what do you like the least? The people. So being able to sort of be selective about our people in our lives is something that can help us. So this idea that we're, maybe pruning away experiences or social connections that are more negative for us, it's, you could see it as like, well, it's a kind of a fake, like a Pollyanna positivity. But really, we're going along with our brain becoming better at handling negativity and dealing with negativity. So there's the outside of the brain is what helps us think. And then there's an interior part of the brain that's more about our emotions, fear, anger, happiness, sadness. And that emotional system as we age usually becomes less reactive. Yay. Because I can tell you the 19-year-olds that I see in class, they're pretty emotionally reactive a lot of the time. And that is, this is a place where mindfulness and sort of this academic perspective really coincide. Because we see this with age, that the limbic system, that's what it's called, becomes less reactive. So we see something that's upsetting and we're better able to say, all right, yeah, I don't like that, and maybe turn away if it's not something that we need to deal with right now, versus, all right, well, let's choose a traffic example. We've probably all driven, right? Somebody cuts you off. Somebody merges onto the highway right in front of you, and you have to put on your brakes, and it's scary for a few seconds. If we have a less reactive limbic system, we go, wow, lucky nothing happened. Glad everybody's okay, and I hope that person drives safer in the future. Or, have you ever been with somebody who is more like a road rage person? They talk and think about that, 5-second occurrence for the next hour or for the next days, right? And kind of reactivate that fear and anger. And we're less likely to do that, fortunately, as we age. And that is also something that mindfulness can teach you to let go of. We'll talk about that. So this lowered emotional reactivity really helps us respond better to challenges. Because you have an opportunity, and this is, again, what I see as something that mindfulness also helps with. Say somebody close to you says that thing again that just really pushes your button, whatever it is. If your limbic system is really reactive, you immediately come back with, you blah, 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 I can't believe you're blah, 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 right? And then it accelerates from there. When we're less reactive, we have a moment to say, oh, I can't believe they, we're thinking, I can't believe they said that again. But they had a really rough day at work. So maybe I'll just remind them that I prefer not to hear about that, and we'll let it, and then the whole thing can calm down. So I see this as definitely a positive with aging.
Are you entertaining questions now?
Yeah, sure.
Or what?
Go ahead.
The vocabulary of this whole area fascinates me because we talk about age and then we talk about getting older. And aging to me used to mean wine or cheese. And when we talk about that, the Department of the Aging, why couldn't it be the Department of the Getting Older? Or even in a lot of the words that you're using, why does it have to be age, which had a negative connotation for a long time? Maybe it's changing. Getting older seems to me to be softer somehow.
That's interesting, and thanks for that feedback. So in case you didn't hear, Sunny's sort of reflecting on when I say getting older, it feels a little more nicer than aging, or you notice I probably avoided, like, when you're old, I tend to avoid that. Although if you write a research paper about people, say, over the age of 65, you're supposed to call them older adults. That's the terminology that's most accepted now. Yeah.
But if you age like cheese, you're gonna.
We should all age like cheese and wine, right? And I think that we forget that, that age improves many things, and potentially us, as we saw with the happiness. And I'm sorry, is the microphone kind of going in and out? So as we get older, I'm going to pay attention to my language now, Sonny. One thing that might happen, and that is a stereotype, is that we might become wise. So a student and I did a little mini study of this this past semester, and there's no general agreement about what wisdom is and whether everybody gets wiser as they age. But I think that it's worth thinking about wisdom as another aspect of how there might be growth, and something to not necessarily aspire to, but to think, how am I wiser than when I was 20? And I'm pretty sure that we're all wiser than when we were 20. We have more expertise in just how to manage life. We have more, I'm sure, reflective capacity, again, to think, I have a particular point of view on the world, and this person's point of view is very different, but maybe I could understand how they got to that, right? Rather than you're a bad person because you think that way. So I'm not going to answer those questions, but I think that they're interesting.
Thank you.
Does mindfulness lead to wisdom? I think yes, but let me talk about what mindfulness is. And there's probably too much on this slide, but just let me take you through a little tour of how I got involved with mindfulness and meditation. I was raised in a Protestant church, which I don't participate in anymore, but I am familiar with that religious background. I did yoga for many years, and that led to my interest in meditation. I don't want to have to explain this too much, but the teachers and the retreats that I've done are in a Buddhist tradition that's not Tibetan, and that's not Zen, which comes from primarily Japan, but also China. So the people that I have who have been my teachers have had teachers who are from countries like Burma and Thailand. So just so you know, it's kind of like, there's lots of there's Presbyterians and Congregationalists and Methodists and stuff. In the Buddhist tradition, there are also different, they don't call them denominations, but traditions. And just wanted to tell you where my background is. And, of course, because I'm a teacher, so I'm like, oh, here's this cool thing that I really like. Why don't I learn how to teach it? So I did a couple of other trainings and a graduate certificate, and recently this teacher certification. But the important question is, what is mindfulness? And then we'll get how it relates to growth in later life. So what I find interesting about mindfulness today is that you don't have to know anything about it to know it's supposed to be good. Why else would we buy a book about mindful work, or want to have mindful babies, or mindful birthing? Mindful, it's everywhere. And the interesting thing for me is that there's actually not a lot of agreement about what that means. It's a new buzzword. So here's the way I like to talk about it. And this is a formulation courtesy of the social psychologist Ellen Langer. And if you want to laugh, I highly recommend this YouTube video, which is called Mindfulness Over Matter. I think she's hilarious. But she starts off by talking about mindlessness. Do any of us know what it's like to be mindless? Yes. When you leave your house and you start driving to work instead of the grocery store, or, you realize that you've done something without even thinking about it. So mindlessness, an inactive state of mind. You're not really there. You're going through the motions, you're, You know, doing something that's a habit. Maybe you're on social media. This is what my students look like before class, by the way. If this was my class and I wasn't ready yet, and you were 20 years old, you'd all be on your phones. And she has this quote in this video, which I love. If we're mindless, we are typically in error, but rarely in doubt. In other words, we're often doing things that aren't appropriate to the situation, but we don't realize it because we're not even paying attention to the situation. So for her, in contrast to mindlessness, mindfulness is when you have an active state of mind. You're aware of maybe how your drive to work today is different from your drive to work yesterday. You're sensitive to context. Oh, the construction is done, or there's a little bit of rain on the road. And you're engaged. You're not checking out. You're paying attention to what's actually in this context, right in front of you. So she comes at this from a strictly scientific point of view. She, sorry, I swear I'm not doing anything. She's done many experiments demonstrating that being engaged in the present, sensitive to context, makes a difference. Are any of you music lovers? I'm a musician, so she did a study where she had a symphony orchestra play a movement of a symphony, and she told them, play this exactly the way you played it when you thought it was your best time. And they recorded that. And then she gave them an instruction, do something a little bit different this time. Play it a little bit differently, you know, within the context of this is the fourth movement of Brahms, whatever. And people liked the second one better, where each individual musician was told, make it a little bit different. And she's claiming that that was the mindful recording, because those musicians weren't just reenacting something they had done before. They were like, oh, how can I make this different? How can I do something a little bit new? And she probably literally has 1,000 experiments that she's done to demonstrate that this is a quality that we appreciate. So this is one definition of mindfulness. This is a picture of John Kabat-Zinn, who is well known in the mindfulness world. And this is a definition that you see in many books and talks about mindfulness. So he says mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. This non-judgmentally is interesting because what he's talking about is not saying, oh, it's fine if you're hurting that person, whatever, I'm not going to judge you. No, he's saying, I'm going to really pay attention to what's happening without, viewing it through a filter that tells me some things are important and some things aren't important. So it's a way of being aware of maybe what filters you are bringing to your experience. So something that I always want to address is mindfulness spiritual and or religious, i.e., do you have to be a Buddhist to meditate? You do not. We always want to acknowledge that a lot of these meditative techniques do arise from a Buddhist tradition, and that there's a very rich background in terms of observation of the mind that comes from Buddhism. But just these couple of examples I have on the slide, like a book about the mindful Christian and a Jewish meditation retreat. And the fact that in health clubs or in schools we do meditation, it is definitely possible to describe and practice meditation, and then within any kind of spiritual or religious framework that you have. Actually, in this room
in the spring of 2020, before the pandemic, I was teaching a class here called Mindfulness and Aging. And one of my participants was Bob McCune, who probably many of you Longview residents remember. And Bob had been a Methodist minister for his whole life. And so we talked about the relationship between meditation and prayer in particular, which was his practice that he was familiar with. And so I'll just say that Bob McCune did not see any problem with practicing meditation and being a Christian, because we're really just exploring our mental habits. That's really what I see for most of us, what meditation is. We're exploring ways in which our mind is not present and engaged. So I only have one slide on this, and we won't go into it, but I say the impacts of mindfulness on health, that perhaps it reduces stress, it helps people deal with pain, it's been used to treat addiction, it can help with anxiety and depression, but with a big asterisk that the science isn't really great yet. More and more studies come out, but they all define mindfulness differently, they all have different interventions. Is it you meditate once for 10 minutes, or you're comparing people who have meditated for 30 years with people who have never meditated? I think the research is going to get there to show that certain interventions for certain people help with certain things, but there's very little research that documents any harm to meditation. So that's one thing in its favor, right? You can try it and be pretty sure that it's not going to be harmful, unlike probably some of the medications that we've all taken. So if mindfulness is so great, why don't we live in nirvana? And I love this quote: meditation and mindfulness are simple but not easy. And anybody who's tried it, and you may know this after we try it together, right? If I ask you to sit quietly, okay, that right there is hard for many people. But imagine you're sitting quietly and you're aware of your thoughts, but you're trying not to get caught up in your thoughts. That is not easy. I think that, I obviously care about meditation, mindfulness, and find it helpful. But I think every person has to find their own path. So I've been a little bit unclear. I've said mindfulness, I said meditation. How are those things different? Mindfulness is a state that's natural to everybody. Everybody's experienced those moments of being really engaged with something. In fact, if you watch the Olympics, right, there's a lot of, did you see the gymnasts? Actually, some of them actually put their hand on their belly and they're before they do their incredible things on the balance beam, right? They're encouraging themselves to become mindful of the moment so that they can react to, if their foot doesn't land directly on the beam or whatever. So we've all experienced this engagement. My husband loves to ride his bicycle. That is his mindful place, right? When he's out on the road, cycling with his friends, outdoors, looking at nature, he is engaged in the present moment. Meditation is a way that we can train ourselves to hopefully incorporate more mindfulness in our lives. And so I think about it this way. So if you do any strength training, you might do bicep curls with weights. And you're not doing that so that you can get really good at bicep curls, right? Who cares? I don't care, right? But you do that so that if your husband tells you to buy 3 bags of flour, that you can actually carry those grocery bags, right? So the work you do in the gym is training you in strength that you'll use in real life. And so I see meditation as training so that you in real life have this ability to choose how to react in the moment. Again, someone says something to you that pushes your buttons, because you've had this experience of sitting on the cushion or in the chair, watching your thoughts, you're able to see, oh wow, I really feel myself getting angry. My heart's beating faster, and I can observe, that I want to say these things, and then I can choose. Maybe I want to say those things, and maybe I don't want to. But we meditate so that we can. I've said, help you get out of your own way. That is honestly the way it feels to me. Do you know what it's like to get in your own way? Like, am I doing that thing again? Or, how come I can't? I said I was going to do this and I'm not doing that. Those kinds of disconnects, I feel like meditation helps you, as I say, get out of your own way. All right, let me just address a few things that might concern people who are new to meditation. First of all, there are lots of different kinds. You can be seated, you could be lying down, standing, walking. You're always, for all practices, there's some degree of focusing your attention. Often that's on the breath or on physical sensations, but it could also be other things like thoughts, emotions, phrases. So if you've heard about mantras, right, that's a kind of meditation where people say a phrase or a word, and that's what you're using to focus your attention. So we almost always start with concentration practices because we're usually, most of us, and I'll include myself, are not very good at concentration. So we're always trying to start there. I just want to emphasize that there are a lot of meditative practices that are designed to enhance our ability to use compassion, which I think is not as well known. So enhancing compassion is clearly something that we could all use in this world. All right, misconceptions. If I meditate, I have to devote lots of time each day. Regular practice is most important. I say 5 to 10 minutes. A minute can sometimes be enough. If I am going to a meeting that I don't want to be in or I think is going to be tough, right? I just put my hands on my lap and try to feel that for a few moments before the meeting starts, right? To bring myself away from, this is going to be a bad meeting, I can't, this, that, the other thing, just like bring myself into the present moment. So you don't need to devote a lot of time. I can't sit cross-legged, so I can't meditate. Absolutely, sitting in a chair is perfectly fine. Again, the goal is to bring this quality of mindfulness into whatever your body position is, so you can certainly meditate in whatever is comfortable. And here's the big one. My mind is too busy. I'll never quiet my thoughts. I hear this from my students all the time. Well, my thoughts were going the whole time, so clearly I can't meditate. I've said here on the slide, the goal of meditation is not to shut off your mind, but to develop the capacity to observe it. Another way I've heard this phrase is that we're just trying to change our relationship to the thoughts. I often think of my brain now as this wonderful machine that's doing what it's designed to do, which is just coming over here. Well, I think I have enough time, but if there's that bad traffic light downtown, that's the stuff my brain is good at. Thinking through, projecting into the future, what might happen. Sometimes I don't want it to do that. I don't need you right now. And so maybe I just say, isn't that interesting? Look at my brain going and doing its thing. So we're changing our relationship to our thoughts. I'm sorry to say, and maybe you walk out right now, right, that meditation won't get you to a place where you can just switch your thoughts off like that. It also, sadly, doesn't give you the ability to fall asleep whenever you want to. Curses! It gives you the ability to perhaps suffer less when you can't sleep. That's where I'm at. But so, let's try it right now, shall we? I'll get a chair.
Marianne,
Yes.
something that has helped me over the years to take care of those thoughts that won't stop is think of them as a parade, and they're marching through my mind, and I'm just watching them.
Yes.
It's like, oh, isn't that interesting?
Yes. That's a great image. I like
Yeah.
that. Sometimes I've you think of them as like clouds and they're just
Right.
going across the sky, but anything you can do to imagine that you're just watching them. And I like the parade example because in my last silent retreat that I went to, it was 2 weeks long. It was a long time to do a lot of meditation. There was one session where I was thinking, I think it was that I was really bored in that moment. Oh, if I had a medical emergency, I bet they'd call 911 and it was this whole scenario, and I just realized my brain was just like, here, have some entertainment, you know? And I think we've all observed that, right? You know, if nothing's going on, our brain is happy to provide something for us in the way of worry or fantasy or whatever. But yes, I think the parade is a great way to think about it. Here comes the Kiwanis float and the, yeah.
I found, like, if I have to make a phone call I really don't wanna make,
Uh,
I just take just a few breaths, just do a couple mindfulness and things, and then pick up the phone. It goes so much better, just to calm that before.
what a great example. Yeah, we've all had those things that, you know, we're
A lot of them.
we're tense about, we're worried about, and you're probably thinking, here's all the ways in which it's gonna be bad. If you let that go, then you just let it be, unfold. Yeah, great. Yeah.
When your mind is just going, like we were going to bed, we can't sleep, so everything's going. Repeating a mantra, or, Catholics say the rosary, and they know it so by heart, it's so mechanical that before you know it, you're asleep.
Yeah, right. That's a great example of something that collects your mind.
Yeah, and they have examples there of their saints they were doing this, and then they get up, the limitations kind of.
Oh,
Because they totally went out, they forgot where they were or what the world was burdening them with.
I'm just, I never had trouble sleeping before menopause, just saying. But, so, still getting used to the new situation. So, yeah, so let's do, some minutes of meditation, maybe 10-ish. So again, nothing special you need to do physically. I do feel like it's nice if if we're all sitting in a chair, if your feet are connected to the floor and your arms are just wherever they're comfortable. I mean, I tend to like to have my hands together, but that's a personal preference. It could certainly be on your lap or on the chair. The purpose of having your body be still is, again, for that increased ability to be aware of what's going on in the mind. So find your comfortable position. And I like to close my eyes because if my eyes are open, I'm too busy looking around, but there's no requirement. If your eyes are open, you could just look at the floor in front of you. But if you feel comfortable, you might try closing your eyes. And we'll begin by just observing different areas of the body. That's often a good way to start this practice of tuning into what's present, right? Our body only exists in this present moment. So you might notice your sort of neck and shoulder area. I'm noticing that mine are going up and down a little bit with my breath. If that's true for you, and the next time you exhale, really see if you can release through the neck and shoulders. Just really let your shoulders let go. Notice how that feels. Maybe bring your attention down to your hands. Certainly, I invite you to relax your hands. But also notice how many sensations you can pay attention to in your hands. You can feel warmth or coolness. Maybe your hands are warm on one side and cool on another. Maybe there's pressure if your hands are resting on something. And maybe you also notice if your hands are resting against your clothing or against the chair. You get a sense of it's rough or smooth. You might notice now the contact between your body and the chair. You might feel the chair against your back and under your pelvis. Feeling how the chair supports you. Is there any way that you can let go a little bit more into the support of the chair? And then if your feet are on the floor, feel that contact. Just notice sensations in your feet. Again, warmth and coolness, pressure. Sensations of your footwear or socks. And in the context of your body sitting, you might then be better able to tune into the movements of the breath. Again, in this practice, you're not being asked to breathe in a certain way. But to just notice. Do you feel the breath in the chest? The sides of the ribs? The belly? You might notice, as I often notice, that there's a desire to control the breathing. That's something you can notice as well. So if we're looking to develop concentration, we might choose to count our breaths if our mind is needs a little something to do. You can also just use simple words like in and out, or other words of your choosing that kind of coordinate with the breath. And then I would say inevitably you're going to notice thoughts arising. Or you're going to be noticing hearing instead of your breath, right? You're hearing the air conditioning. Or there's another physical sensation that becomes predominant. Again, not a worry, not a failure. You are observing that this is what your experience is like. So you see what it's like to direct it back to the breath. Just aiming for even one round of breath that you're actually experiencing. Feeling the in-breath that moves to the out-breath. And sometimes your experience doing this practice will be finding calm. And sometimes it will be noticing agitation or nervousness or whatever emotion is predominant. But that's why we stick with the practice over many moments. So we get familiar with all these different aspects of our experience. As we near the closing, I just want to do a little bit of the compassion practice. I'll talk about it more in a minute, but in this metta practice, M-E-T-T-A, we cultivate goodwill towards ourselves and others. So I'll say some phrases, and you can just follow along silently. May I be safe and well. May I be peaceful. May I live with ease and with kindness. May I be safe and well. May I be peaceful. May I live with ease and with kindness. And we'll do that for this group of people in this room. May we be safe and well. May we be peaceful. May we live with ease and with kindness. May we be safe and well. May we be peaceful. May we live with ease and with kindness. And with that, I'll bring this to a close. Any reactions to that practice or observations about what happened for you? Sunny?
We tried to have, under your guidance, a meditation group, and it was enthusiastically received, and then it didn't continue. And I wondered about that, because it was so inviting. And for two of us, we just didn't keep on doing it ourselves, but it was such a shock between people that were there and then people that never came back again. It was disappointing.
I would say it's hard for all of us, I think, to establish a meditation practice.
Mhm.
Even if you have, kind of like an initial good experience, it's hard to take the time to just sit. I find this in my own life.
Mhm.
Actually, especially on vacation, like, what is that about? But other things happen, and then you don't do it. So that's why I emphasize that even a short period of time is useful. Suzanne?
Why do you call it meditation and not relaxation techniques?
I guess it's because of my training,
That's what
and
I
it's
felt,
not
meditation.
always. I mean, it often is relaxing, I find, but it's, I think, more than, like what I guided initially was, like relax your shoulders and relax into the chair, but the observing your thoughts and the compassion for others, that's something different than relaxation. So I think it includes some relaxation techniques, but it also has other aspects of it as well. So let me just finish up here. So here's my slide about training in kindness. I use this word metta, so that's a word that comes from the Buddhist tradition that means this turning towards yourself or others or your experience with kindness. And I use these pictures of kids' sports because I find that a lot of us are very harsh on ourselves. We're doing this to ourselves. I can't believe you did that again, or whatever your thing is that you berate yourself for. But if you had a kid who was playing soccer, wouldn't you like to have this coach who's saying, like, we had trouble out there. What do you think we can do to change that? And, I know that we have the capacity to do better, versus the, you so-and-so, I can't believe you didn't kick that ball. So this training in may I be safe and well, may I be peaceful, a lot of times we're doing that to deal with our inner critic. And I think that's a pretty good picture of what an inner critic might look like.
Yes.
All right, we'll finish up and then we can chat. This is a practice that I especially highlight to my students, who I think are just in a time of life where, when you're in school, you're being judged all the time. So all of us need times when we give ourselves a break. So if we're feeling, self-criticism arise, we can notice that. We can notice that other human beings have similar difficulties, and we can give ourselves a break. I have a very good friend who is a parent of a young child, and she uses this all the time. Right when, the child says, no, I won't take a bath. Notice that moment of suffering. Notice that this is a common human experience, and give yourself a break, right? She's not a bad parent because, there's this moment of conflict, right? And then she can regroup and bring herself back to that moment with more kindness for herself and her daughter. So just an idea for you.
I've got a comment on that. I find the opposite experience, that my two adult daughters, especially the older one, is constantly judging me. She
Oh.
won't give me a break. I wanna say, when you were 2 years old, I took you by the hand, or I helped you learn to speak. Please, because I didn't get in the car the right way, don't
Oh.
call me out on something like that. But it doesn't, of course, you can't do that. You can't do that. She's very judgmental, and that's probably part of her temperament. And some people wouldn't be that way, but it's hard. When you say, give myself a break, I wanna say, you give me a break.
Yes, and I think we all have people in our lives who we would like them to give us a break, like you described, and that is also an opportunity for, I think, Sunny, you sound like you're there, of knowing what we can change and what we can't change.
Mhm.
It sounds like this has been a pattern that perhaps you don't see changing necessarily in the future, and so what can you do so that you don't suffer as much? But very hard. Okay. Just a little word about ageism, something I talk a lot with my students about. And it's not necessarily that it's only younger people who have negative ideas about what being old, and I'll use that word deliberately here, is like. If we've grown up with those attitudes, we bring them into our own later years. Research has shown that negative beliefs have a real impact on people. So this page from the UN, this is a little small, but I'll read it to you. Ageism leads to poorer health, social isolation, earlier deaths, and cost economies billions. If we're discounting our own strengths because we're told that, older people can't do this, that, or the other thing, or other people are discounting us, I don't know if that's part of what you're noticing, Sunny, because of preconceived notions, that's a problem. So ageism is another thing, or any kind of prejudice or bias is another thing that mindfulness gives us the opportunity to notice and perhaps not act on, right? We might realize, oh, I expected this person to be a certain way because I noticed that they're from a certain race, or they, are from a certain religion, or whatever. I should check that, right? Is that a stereotype that I'm acting on? So I'm going to sum up, and then I'm happy to, first have a conversation. So that academic research shows that we do often gain what I would call wisdom and perspective as we age, right? We know how to sort of choose our activities so that it increases our happiness. We have these goals in terms of leaving the world a better place and finding meaning. Right, what I just said, we get better at shaping our lives to support our well-being. And this is consistent with what mindfulness can do for us. We can use mindfulness to manage stress and gain perspective, and also get better at recognizing what's going to support our well-being. And so I see these two things, the wisdom and perspective that many of us gain as we age, right? We decided age was the better word, age. I think can be supported with mindfulness practice. They have similar goals of living more fully and experiencing our lives, I think, more fully. So here are a couple things that I like in terms of, what are good basic resources. If you're interested in that, the author who talks about developmental intelligence and the stages of later life, The Mature Mind by Gene Cohen. I think the best introduction to meditation is this book by Sharon Salzberg called Real Happiness. it's set up as a, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, but she has a very easily understood introduction to sort of the basics of mindfulness practice. If you're interested in the intersection of meditation and aging, this Aging as a Spiritual Practice by Louis Richmond is an interesting one. And if that work with compassion, and particularly self-compassion, is of interest to you, this Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer is really good. It has actually, it really is a workbook. It has exercises you can do and links to meditations you can listen to. I have appreciated this 10% Happier app. Actually, the book 10% Happier by Dan Harris is also a great read if you're interested in that. But this app has a lot of guided meditations. You can also find guided meditations on the internet for free. You do have to pay for 10% Happier, but that is one that I've used that I can vouch for. All right. Questions or comments, things that you thought about that you want to share with me?
So one of the facts that you pointed out near the beginning is that as your brain matures, you adjust better to emotional situations and don't get as upset and excited. I've kind of noticed that. I didn't know if that was a good thing or
Well, I think it's a good thing, because we probably all know, we've seen people, or maybe we've experienced ourselves, what happens when we get overwhelmed by fear or anger or anxiety, right? It's not pretty, and we do things that we regret. So if you're finding that that's slower to build up.
yeah, and it's easier to just not get as upset as before. And like I said, I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but that's one of the first things you pointed out there. And
I think that doesn't mean that, say, we stop advocating for things that we believe are right. Right? I think there's this idea that, well, like, unless we're angry, we're not gonna...
Not as disappointed if something doesn't come through.
And better able then to, if that didn't work out, maybe there's this other thing. Yeah, interesting that you noticed that. Other things you thought about?
There was just a course, or is a course here, presented by something called Great Courses of the Universe, and apparently nobody is very interested in it, and that's sad. I went initially, and I had the same response as many others. The man is not presenting information that seems to be usable, and have you gone through that course? It's claiming to be wonderful.
What was the topic of the...
Mindfulness is just
Oh,
the
really?
topic. That's it's in the schedule that way.
Interesting.
Come and learn about mindfulness from one of the world's expert kind of people. And why his presentation, I guess, was so bad.
Interesting. I haven't watched that great course myself, but I can imagine that would be tough to do.
I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it.
I mean, I haven't heard from my students that they find were there practices, or was he just talking about mindfulness?
Talking.
Okay, so that sounds excruciating, because it's like, do you want me to come up here and lecture about riding a bike, or do you want to actually get on the bike and go? I mean, I think if you're you need to do it so that the 12 sessions is meaningful. Anything else? Well, thank you. I enjoyed doing this, and I hope that you found it worthwhile.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.